Rain hammered the forest canopy. Each drop struck like a fist against dead leaves, against bark stripped pale by winter winds. Guts moved through the downpour without hurry. The dragon slayer rested against his shoulder, heavy as iron truth, cold as every grave he'd left behind. The brand burned, not the dull ache he'd learned to carry like a second heartbeat. This was different, sharper, as if something on the other side of flesh and bone had reached through the scar tissue and gripped his throat from within. He stopped. Water ran down the blade's edge in dark rivulets. His breathing came shallow. The world thinned. He'd felt it before in the seconds before apostles crawled from shadow. That sensation of reality peeling back, exposing something underneath that had teeth. But this pulled differently. Not toward darkness. Not toward the God hand's ordained slaughter. Somewhere else entirely. The brand flared white-hot. Guts staggered. His vision blurred at the edges, then cracked. Between the trees, the rain no longer fell in straight lines. It twisted, bent, as though space itself had developed a stutter, a hesitation in the fabric of what should be. He tried to move forward. His boot met ground that wasn't there, and he fell through. Not down, not up. Sideways through a wound in the air that had no business existing. Wind tore at him, but it carried no sound. The dragon slayer remained locked in his grip because he knew nothing else to hold. Darkness pressed from all directions, and within that crushing void, he caught glimpses of something vast and terrible, watching from angles that shouldn't intersect. The passage between worlds cared nothing for his will. It simply was. And then it spat him out like bad meat. He hit Earth, real Earth, solid enough to crack ribs if he'd landed wrong. Guts rolled to his feet by reflex blade already sweeping in an arc that would bisect anything within 6 feet. Nothing. Just rain. Just whined through grass that bent under a gray sky. But wrong sky, wrong grass, wrong rain. The landscape stretched before him like the memory of a place he'd never been. Rolling hills wore autumn colors that bled into mist. To the east, mountains cut the horizon with edges too clean, too old, as if they'd been standing since before men learned to name things. A road ran through the valley below, rutted by cartwheels and generations of feet. Smoke rose from distant chimneys. He stood there, dripping, breathing hard. The brand had stopped screaming. Now it merely watched, waiting. That was worse somehow, because the scar only quieted when shadow drew close enough to matter. Guts scanned the tree line. No movement, no apostles. No behelits whispering destiny's price. Just wind and wet stone and the smell of earth that hadn't been soaked in enough blood yet. He checked the dragon slayer. Still whole, still his. The cannon arm felt lighter than it should, as though the weight of his world hadn't fully transferred across whatever threshold he'd been dragged through. A crow called from somewhere overhead. Not the carrion screamers that followed battlefields. Something cleaner, almost curious. He started walking. The road would have answers, or it would have people. People meant information. Information meant finding the way back. And if no way back existed, then he'd carve one. Same as always. The rain eased to drizzle as he descended the hillside. Each step felt strange, as though gravity had shifted half a degree from where it belonged. The air tasted different too, cleaner maybe, or just older, like it had been breathing in and out since before his kind of hatred learned to walk upright. Behind him, the place where he'd fallen through had already sealed itself. No scar, no wound, just rain and grass and the wind erasing footprints that led nowhere. But the brand remembered. And in the deep places of this new world, in the cracks between firelight and total dark, something else remembered too. It had felt him arrive, felt the intrusion of a soul marked by sacrifices older than time itself, the wrongness of him. And it began to turn its attention slowly, like a vast eye opening beneath miles of stone and shadow. Guts walked on unaware, or perhaps simply uncaring. The dragon slayer caught what little light remained in the day and drank it down to nothing. Ahead, the first lights of civilization flickered into being. Somewhere in that direction lay Bree. Somewhere beyond that, riders in black searched roads for a prize they didn't know had just gained a complication. The war for Middle-earth's soul had been grinding forward for 3 ages. Tonight, it would gain a soldier who'd never heard its name, who didn't believe in fate or destiny or the slow defeat of all good things, who believed only in standing up. One more time. The village of Bree hunched against the wind, like something trying to make itself smaller. Guts approached from the south as twilight bled the last warmth from the sky. Wooden walls ringed the settlement topped with stakes that wouldn't stop anything serious. Torchlight flickered behind shuttered windows. The gate stood open, guarded by 2 men whose postures said they'd never seen real violence. He walked past them without slowing. They stared at the sword on his back, but said nothing. Smart. Inside, the streets were mud and worn cobblestone. People hurried between buildings with their heads down, carrying the end-of-day exhaustion that came from honest work. A few glanced his way, most looked away faster. The Dragon Slayer had that effect. It announced things people didn't want to know about the world. The prancing pony squatted at the center of town, 2 stories of weathered timber and smoke-stained plaster. Light and noise spilled from its windows. Guts studied it from across the street, weighing options. He needed information. Taverns had information. They also had crowds' questions, and the kind of attention that usually ended with someone doing something stupid. He started toward it anyway. The door opened before he reached it. 4 small figures tumbled out, laughing and jostling each other. Not children. Too old for that. But built like children, barely reaching his chest, with round faces and curly hair. They froze when they saw him, eyes going wide. Guts stepped around them. One made a squeaking sound. He pushed through the doorway into warmth and pipe smoke and the smell of roasted meat. The common room went quiet. Not all at once. Just a ripple of silence spreading from where he stood, conversations dying mid-word as heads turned. He scanned the space with the practiced eye of someone who'd learned to count exits before counting coins. 30 people, maybe more. Farmers and merchants by the look of them, soft hands, soft lives. One figure in the corner wore a travel-stained cloak and sat with his back to the wall. That one had harder eyes. Guts moved to the bar. The innkeeper approached, slowly wiping his hands on a rag that had seen cleaner days. Middle-aged balding with the careful smile of someone who'd learned not to antagonize paying customers. Evening, stranger. Looking for a room. Information. Guts kept his voice level. I'm heading east. What's between here and the next town? The innkeeper's smile tightened. Well, now that depends on which road you take. The east road runs through to Rivendell, but it's a long journey. Weeks on foot. And the roads aren't what they were. Trouble on them lately. What kind of trouble? A pause. The man's eyes flicked to the sword, then away. Wolves, bandits, the usual. The lie sat there between them, obvious as blood on snow. Guts let it pass. He'd get nothing useful from a frightened innkeeper. He ordered food and ale, paid in coin, that made the man's eyebrows rise, and found an empty table near the wall. The conversations resumed around him quieter now, with stolen glances in his direction. He ate without tasting, mind working through what he knew. This place felt wrong. Not apostle wrong. Not the sick twist of reality that announced behalitz and sacrifices. Something else. Older, maybe. Colder. The brand hadn't flared since he'd arrived, but it hummed beneath his skin like a tooth waiting to ache. The door banged open. A man stumbled in gasping clothes, torn and muddy. Blood ran from a cut above his eye. They're coming on the road not 2 miles out. They killed Martin and took his horses. God help us, they're coming for the village. The room exploded into chaos. Voices rose in panic, people surging toward the door or pressing back against the walls. The innkeeper was shouting something about staying calm. Nobody listened. Guts stood. His chair scraped loud enough to cut through the noise. People near him flinched back, making space. He moved toward the bleeding man who'd collapsed into a chair by the fire. "How many?" Guts asked. The man looked up, eyes unfocused. "What? How many attacked you?" Maybe a dozen more." They came out of the dark, never seen their like before. Gray skin, black armor, moved like wolves. Not bandits then. Guts turned toward the door. Behind him, the cloaked figure in the corner rose smoothly, hand already on his sword. Their eyes met across the room. The stranger's gaze was steel and calculation measuring Guts, the way you'd measure an opponent before the first strike. "You're going out there," the man said, not a question. "Unless you've got a better plan." "I have the same plan." He moved forward, and the crowd parted for him too. Up close, he was tall and weathered with a day's worth of stubble, and the kind of scars you earned by surviving what should have killed you. "Strider." "You." Guts. They stepped into the night together. No more words needed. That language, the understanding between people who'd seen the shape of death and walked toward it anyway, transcended whatever gap existed between worlds. The street was empty now. Everyone had barricaded themselves inside. Wind carried the smell of rain and something sharper. Blood, smoke. The sound of screaming rose from the south gate, thin and desperate. Strider drew his sword, long blade well used. "Can you fight?" Guts pulled the dragon slayer free. It came up like the weight of every ended life catching torchlight along its chipped edge. "Yeah." They ran. The south gate had been torn open. Not broken down, torn as though something had reached through the wood and ripped it apart with bare hands. Bodies lay in the mud. 3 guards' throats cut, eyes staring at nothing. Beyond the gate, fires burned in the fields. Figures moved through the smoke. Tall, hunched, wearing armor that seemed to drink the light. Their weapons dripped. One turned toward the gate and Guts saw its face. Gray flesh pulled tight over a skull that had never been human. Yellow eyes, too wide, burning with a hunger that had nothing to do with food. It charged. Guts met it head on. The dragon slayer came down in an arc that split the night. The blade connected with the creature's shoulder and kept going, shearing through armor and bone, and whatever passed for a spine. Black blood sprayed. The thing hit the ground in 2 pieces, still twitching. 3 more came at him from the left. He pivoted, swung low, caught the first at the knees. It went down, shrieking. The second lunged with a curved blade. Guts parried, felt the impact sing up his arms, drove his boot into its chest. Ribs cracked. The third tried to circle behind him. Strider's sword took it through the throat. They fought back to back without planning it, moving in the brutal rhythm that came from too many battles to count. Strider's style was precise, economical, each strike calculated to end a threat with minimal wasted motion. Guts fought like a landslide, overwhelming, unstoppable, crushing everything in his path through sheer momentum. The creatures kept coming. A dozen became 8, became 5. Black blood pooled in the mud. Guts took a hit across his shoulder armor, turning the blade enough to prevent a deep cut. Pain flared. He ignored it, reversed his grip, brought the Dragon Slayer up through a creature's torso from groin to skull. The last 2 broke and ran. Strider let them go. He stood breathing hard, sword still raised, eyes scanning the darkness for more threats. When none came, he lowered the blade slowly and turned to look at Guts. "That sword," he said. "What is it?" "Mine." A pause. Then something that might have been respect flickered across Strider's face. "Fair enough." He wiped his blade clean on a dead creature's cloak, sheathed it with the smooth motion of long practice. "These were scouts, testing our defenses. More will come." "How do you know?" "Because I've been tracking them for 3 days." Strider looked toward the east, where darkness lay thick enough to choke on. "There's a larger force moving through the wilderness. Orcs, possibly worse. Someone's stirring them up, pointing them at settlements along the road." Guts followed his gaze. "You're hunting them." "I'm doing what needs to be done." Strider turned back, studying him with those hard eyes. "You're not from here. Your armor, your blade, the way you fight. Where are you from?" "Somewhere else." "Not good enough." "It'll have to be." Guts felt the brand pulse, once a warning or a confirmation. "I'm heading east. If these things are between me and where I need to go, I'll go through them." Strider was quiet for a long moment. Behind them, the village was stirring. Voices called out, people emerging cautiously to survey the damage. The innkeeper appeared in the gateway, face pale. "You saved us," he said, voice shaking. "Thank you. Thank you both." Strider ignored him. He kept his attention on Guts, weighing something. Finally, he nodded. "I'm traveling the same direction. The hobbits, those small folk you saw earlier, they're under my protection. We leave at dawn. You can come with us if you follow my lead, and don't ask questions I won't answer." "Not interested in company?" "You'll get killed alone. These lands are more dangerous than you know, and you don't know the terrain." Strider's expression didn't change. "I'm not asking because I like you. I'm asking because you can fight, and we'll need every sword before this is done." Guts looked at the corpses littering the gate, at the dragon slayer still dripping black ichor, at the darkness beyond the walls where more of those things waited. He thought about the brand's silence and what that meant. About being dropped into a world he didn't understand, facing enemies he'd never seen. About standing up anyway. "Dawn," he said. Strider nodded once and walked back toward the prancing pony. Guts stayed at the gate, watching the fields burn themselves out. The wind changed direction, carrying smoke and the promise of rain. Somewhere in the distance, something howled. Not a wolf. Something that remembered what wolves used to be before men gave them names. He wiped the dragon slayer clean and started looking for a place to sleep that wouldn't leave him with a knife in his back. Tomorrow he'd follow a stranger into hostile territory. Tomorrow he'd learn what kind of hell he'd landed in. Tonight he'd take first watch. Same as always. Behind him, Bree locked its gates and prayed to gods he'd never heard of. The prayers wouldn't help. They never did. But prayer was what people did when they couldn't fight. And fighting was all Guts knew. The rain started just before midnight. He stood in it, unmoving, while the dragon slayer caught water and let it run red with the memory of black blood. One more night, one more dawn, one more time. 6 days on the road had taught Guts 2 things about his traveling companions. First, the hobbits never stopped talking. Second, Strider never stopped watching the horizon. They moved east through country that grew wilder with each mile. The farms and hedgerows of Bree gave way to empty moorland, then to broken hills studded with ancient stone. The road beneath their feet was older than it looked, worn smooth by centuries of use, but crumbling at the edges where no one had bothered with repairs. Guts walked at the rear of the group Dragonslayer, across his back, eyes scanning the ridgelines. The hobbits Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin had tried conversation with him on the first day. He'd answered in grunts until they gave up. Now they kept their chatter among themselves, though he caught them stealing glances when they thought he wasn't looking. Strider led from the front, setting a pace that left the hobbits gasping, but never quite complaining. The ranger moved like water, finding the path of least resistance, choosing routes that avoided exposure, kept to cover, maximized their ability to see threats before threats saw them. Professional. Guts could respect that. The brand had been quiet since Bree. Not silent, it never went silent, but subdued. A distant pressure rather than active pain. Whatever it sensed in this world was waiting, watching, not yet ready to strike. That was fine. Guts knew how to wait too. There, Strider said, pointing. Ahead, a hill rose from the moorland like a fist punched through the earth. Not tall, but steep-sided, crowned with broken ruins that caught the fading light. Old watchtower, maybe, or something similar. Stone columns stabbed at the sky, charred black by fire that had burned long ago. Weathertop, Strider continued. Amon Sul in the old tongue. We'll camp there tonight. Defensible position, and we can see anything approaching from miles away. Frodo looked up at the ruins, face pale. It feels wrong. Many things have happened here, Strider said quietly. Not all of them good. But the ruins will shelter us, and height is worth more than comfort. They climbed as dusk gathered in the hollows. The path switchbacked up the hillside, treacherous, with loose scree that clicked and skittered under their boots. Guts watched their back trail. Nothing moved in the gathering dark, but the hairs on his neck prickled with the certainty of being observed. The ruins at the summit formed a rough circle, walls crumbled to waist height in most places. Scorch marks blackened the stone. In the center, a flat area large enough for their camp was ringed by the remains of old columns. Strider examined the ground, touching ash that crumbled to powder at his fingers. Someone was here recently, he said. Days ago, not weeks. They burned wood. He looked at Guts. Wizard, most likely. One of the wise. That's good. It means we're not alone in watching these lands. Guts said nothing. Wizards meant magic, and magic in his experience meant Bihilits, apostles, and the casual cruelty of beings that wore human faces while their insides rotted with hunger. But this world wasn't his, and its rules weren't his to know yet. They made camp as the last light died. No fire, Strider insisted. Too visible. The hobbits huddled together for warmth, sharing what food they carried. Guts took position at the northern edge of the ruins, back against stone that still held the day's heat. Strider joined him after the hobbits settled. You feel it too, the ranger said. Not a question. Something's coming. Yes. Strider's hand rested on his sword hilt. They've been following us since we left Bree, staying just out of sight, matching our pace. Tonight they'll make their move. This place draws them. Why? Because it's a wound in the world. Strider looked out at the darkness spreading across the moor. Great battles were fought here once. Great powers clashed and broke things that should not be broken. The shadow remembers. It's drawn to old pain. The brand pulsed. Once, sharp. Guts' hand found the dragon slayer's grip. How many? I've counted 5 separate trails. Could be more. They're not orcs, wrong gate, wrong scent on the wind. These are older things. Worse things. You have a name for them. Nazgul. Ringwraiths. The 9 who serve the Dark Lord. Strider's voice dropped. They were men once. Great kings given rings of power that promised immortality. The rings gave them exactly what was promised. They cannot die, but they are no longer alive either. Just hunger and will bound in shadow. Guts processed that. Undead then. Or close enough. He'd killed undead before. The trick was finding what anchored them to the world and cutting that anchor. Simple in theory, harder when the anchor was a curse woven into existence itself. Can they be killed? Not by ordinary means. Fire and certain blessed weapons can harm them, drive them back. But truly killing them, Strider shook his head. That requires destroying what binds them to their master. And he is far beyond our reach. So we run. We survive. There's a difference. Strider stood moving back toward the center of the ruins. Get some rest. I'll take first watch. Guts didn't move. Rest was for people who trusted the world not to kill them while they slept. He stayed against the walleyes on the darkness, hand on his sword. The night deepened. Stars came out hard and cold. The wind shifted, carrying a smell that made his jaw clench. Decay. Not the sweet rot of corpses left in the sun, but something colder. The smell of things preserved past their time, kept animate through will alone. The brand burned. Guts stood. Across the ruins, Strider's head snapped up, already moving. The hobbit stirred, sensing danger, even in sleep. Frodo sat up, eyes wide, one hand clutching something at his chest. They came up the hillside in silence. No footsteps. No breath, just the suggestion of movement in the darkness, like shadows peeling themselves from the ground and taking shape. 9 figures in black robes and tarnished crowns, mounted on horses that should have been dead years ago. The horses' eyes glowed with sick green light. The leader stopped at the edge of the ruins. Its hood was empty darkness. No face, no features. Just void that looked back and saw everything you'd ever feared made manifest. Cold rolled off them in waves, not winter cold, deeper than that. The cold of graves opened too soon. Of hope bled dry, of every light in the world, snuffed out one by one, until only darkness remained. It pressed down like physical weight, crushing breath from lungs, strength from limbs. The hobbits were on their knees. Sam tried to stand, couldn't. Pippin made a sound like a wounded animal. Frodo clutched his chest, face twisted in agony around something Guts couldn't see. Strider had his sword out, but his hands shook. Not from fear, from the effort of standing when every nerve screamed to lie down and wait for the end. Guts took a step forward. The cold hit him like a fist. Memory surged up unbidden, the eclipse Casca's broken eyes. Griffith's smile as he reached for godhood while his former friends screamed and died. Every moment of helplessness, every failure, every time he'd been too slow or too weak or too human to save the people who mattered. The brand blazed. Pain lanced through his neck, white-hot and spreading. This was what it felt like to be marked for sacrifice. To have your soul torn open and everything inside exposed to things that fed on suffering. He knew this pain. Had carried it for so long it was part of his skeleton now. Guts kept walking. The lead Nazgul tilted its head, considering. It raised one hand, and the air itself seemed to crack around its fingers. Words came from the void, where its mouth should be spoken in a language that bypassed ears and carved itself directly into the brain. Give it to us. Not talking to him. Talking to Frodo, who clutched whatever hung around his neck and shook his head with desperate fading strength. The Nazgul moved forward. Its horse stepped over the broken wall like the stone meant nothing. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Frost formed on the ground, on the dragon slayer's blade, on Guts's breath as it misted in the air. He swung. The blade came up in an arc that should have split the rider from shoulder to hip. It connected. He felt the impact, felt resistance, but the sensation was wrong. Like cutting through water that fought back. The Nazgul lurched to the side, its mount screaming in a voice that had nothing to do with horses. Black fabric tore. Underneath was nothing. No flesh, no bone. Just more darkness held in roughly human shape by will, and the memory of what it had once been. But it had moved. It had felt the strike. And in that nothing space where the blade had passed through something, had flinched. The other 8 came forward as one. Strider was moving, shouting something Guts didn't catch. The ranger had produced a torch from somewhere, struck it against stone. Fire bloomed. He thrust it toward the nearest Nazgul, and the thing recoiled with a hiss like steam escaping. Fire, right. Guts filed that away. He positioned himself between the Nazgul and the Hobbit's dragon slayer held in both hands. 3 of the wraiths circled left, trying to flank. He rotated to keep them in front, boots scraping stone. The lead Nazgul spoke again. Fool, you cannot harm us. We are beyond death, beyond pain, beyond all the fears that make men weak. Good, Guts said. His voice came out level, almost calm. Then you won't mind when I keep trying. He charged, not away from the dread, not around it. Straight through the center of it, into the teeth of the thing that was supposed to break his will. And leave him curled on the ground, begging for mercy. The dragon slayer whistled through air thick with unnatural cold. The first Nazgul blocked with its sword. Metal rang against metal, the sound flat and wrong. Guts reversed his grip, slammed the crossguard into where a face should be. The wraith's head snapped back. He followed with a horizontal slash that would have disemboweled anything with Guts. The blade passed through darkness. But the Nazgul stumbled. Fell back a step. Then 2. He pressed the advantage. Each swing was calculated brutality, not wild, not panicked, but the methodical destruction of something that needed to be removed from his path. The dragon slayer carved lines through shadow. Where it touched the darkness, thinned, unraveled, took seconds to reform. Not killing them, but hurting them, making them work to maintain coherence. Behind him, Strider had rallied the hobbits. Run down the west slope, stay together. He thrust his torch at another Nazgul, driving it back, giving them space to flee. The wraiths didn't pursue the hobbits. They wanted Frodo, whatever he carried. But Guts was in their way, and he wasn't moving. The lead Nazgul raised both hands. The air split open. Guts felt it more than saw it. Reality tearing something on the other side, pressing through. The cold intensified until his bones ached with it. His breath came in gasps. The brand screamed. And then fire. A line of flame erupted between Guts and the Nazgul, bright enough to burn after images into his vision. The wraiths shrieked, actually shrieked high and piercing and full of rage that had been building for centuries. They retreated, not fleeing but falling back to regroup. Their forms flickered, destabilized by the flames. The lead one pointed at Guts with a hand that trailed smoke. "You will see us again, Marked One. And when we return, no fire will save you." They melted into the darkness. One moment present, the next simply gone, leaving only frost and the smell of old graves. Guts stood in the ruin, breathing hard, Dragonslayer still raised. The fire line was fading, revealing scorch marks on stone. Strider appeared at his shoulder, torch lowered. "That," the ranger said quietly, "was the most foolish thing I've ever seen anyone do." "Did it work?" "You're alive. They're gone. I suppose that's a type of working." Strider looked at him with something approaching awe. "The dread should have broken you. It breaks everyone. But you walked through it like it was morning fog." Guts lowered the sword. His hands weren't shaking, but they wanted to. The brand still burned, a reminder that being brave and being immune were different things. "I've felt worse." "I don't doubt it." Strider turned, calling down the slope. "They're gone. Come back, but carefully." The hobbits emerged from the darkness, pale and shaking. Frodo could barely stand. Sam supported him, shooting grateful looks at Guts that he didn't acknowledge. They'd survived. That was enough. Strider led them back to the ruins and insisted on keeping watch personally. No argument. Guts didn't argue. He sat against the wall, wiping black residue from the Dragonslayer's edge, and watched the eastern horizon lighten toward dawn. "Who are you?" Frodo asked. The hobbit had recovered enough to speak, though his voice still trembled. "Really? Who are you to stand against them like that?" Guts considered the question. Considered all the answers he could give. Considered how little any of them would mean to people from a world where darkness had rules and shapes and names. "Someone who's still standing," he said finally. Frodo nodded slowly, like that made sense. Maybe in this world it did. The sun rose over Weathertop's charred stones. The frost melted. The shadows became ordinary again, holding nothing worse than absence of light. They broke camp in silence and descended the western slope, moving deeper into lands Guts didn't know, toward a destination he didn't understand. But Strider trusted him now. Guts could see it in the way the ranger's shoulders had loosened, the way he no longer kept his sword hand quite so ready when Guts moved. Trust earned in blood and terror, the only kind worth having. The hobbits talked less after that. When they did speak, they included him in their conversations. He still mostly grunted in response. But sometimes when Sam asked a direct question about the road ahead, he'd answer. Small steps, but movement forward. The brand quieted again as they left Weathertop behind. The Nazgul were gone, but not forgotten. They'd be back. Things like that always came back. Guts was fine with that. Let them come. He'd be ready. Same as always. One more dawn, one more road, one more fight that probably should have killed him, but didn't. He'd take it. Rivendell appeared like a memory of something that had never quite existed in the waking world. They crested the final ridge at sunset, and there it was, a valley carved from living stone and water buildings that seemed to grow from the cliff faces rather than being built upon them. Waterfalls sang in harmonies Guts didn't have words for. The architecture followed curves that made his eyes ache if he looked too long, as though the angles refused to obey the same geometry that governed everything else. Beautiful. Alien. wrong in ways that had nothing to do with evil. "The last homely house," Strider said quietly. "Here you can rest. Here you're safe." Guts said nothing. He'd never been safe anywhere. Didn't see why a pretty valley would change that. They descended along paths that switched back through gardens where flowers bloomed out of season. Elves moved between the buildings. Tall, graceful, with faces that could have been carved from marble, if marble could look at you with eyes older than your entire bloodline. They watched the newcomers pass with expressions that revealed nothing. One approached as they reached the main courtyard. Male, though barely. Silver hair, silver eyes, wearing robes that probably cost more than everything Guts owned. The elf's gaze swept over the group, lingered on Frodo with concern, then settled on Guts with something colder. "Aragorn," the elf said. "You've brought guests, and one who does not belong here." "Lindir," Strider's voice carried warning. "This is Guts. He fought beside us at Weathertop. Without him, the hobbits would not have survived." Lindir's expression didn't change. "I see. Lord Elrond will wish to speak with him and examine the halfling's wound." His attention shifted back to Frodo, who looked ready to collapse. "Come, quickly." They were separated. The hobbits taken one direction, Strider another. Guts was left in the courtyard with Lindir, who studied him the way you'd study a stain on fine cloth. "Your weapon," the elf said. "It carries a weight beyond metal. Where did you acquire it? Made it? You forge blades?" "No. Just lived with it long enough that it became what it needed to be." Guts shifted his shoulders, feeling the Dragon Slayer's familiar mass. "Are you taking me to this Elrond, or do I wait here while you ask questions you already know I won't answer?" Lindir's lips thinned. "This way." The interior of Elrond's house was all open spaces and flowing water. No dark corners, no places for shadows to gather. Everything visible, everything measured, everything controlled. It made Goats's skin itch. He preferred darkness you could see coming. They found Elrond in a chamber overlooking the valley. The elf lord stood at a window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the waterfalls catch the last light. He turned as they entered. Older than Lindir. Not in years, elves didn't age the way humans did, but in presence. This one had seen empires rise and crumble, had watched generations of men live and die while he remained. His eyes held the weight of that watching. "So," Elrond said, "you are the one who walked through the Nazgul's dread as though it were merely unpleasant weather." I felt worse. A pause. Then something that might have been amusement flickered across Elrond's face. "Aragorn said the same thing. He also said you fought with skill that speaks of long experience and a weapon that should not exist. It exists. Clearly." Elrond moved closer, each step precise. "But you are not of Middle-earth. Your speech patterns are unfamiliar. Your equipment belongs to no nation I recognize. And there is something about you that—" He stopped, tilting his head. "May I see your neck?" Every instinct said no. The brand wasn't something you showed people. It drew attention, invited questions, marked you as prey for things that fed on sacrifice. But Guts was tired. Tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of pretending the scar wasn't there. He pulled down his collar, exposing the brand. Elrond's eyes widened. Just slightly. Just enough to confirm that he recognized what he was seeing, even if he didn't understand it. "A mark," the elf lord said softly. "A curse. You have been claimed by something. dedicated to, not death, worse than death, an ending that leaves the soul intact but screaming. Yeah. And yet you live, you fight, you stand in defiance of what marked you. Elrond stepped back, clasping his hands again. That requires will of a caliber rarely seen. It also makes you dangerous. I'm not here to cause problems. I believe you. But your presence itself is a problem. Elrond moved to a table, poured water from a crystal pitcher. The mark draws shadow to you, makes you visible to things that hunt in darkness. The Nazgul sensed you at Weathertop, not because you challenged them, but because you carry a beacon that screams to their kind. Guts absorbed that. It matched what he'd suspected. The brand had always been a lodestone for apostles. Made sense it would work the same way here, just with different monsters. Can you remove it? No. Elrond's answer came swift and certain. This is woven into your essence. Removing it would require unmaking you entirely. Even if I possessed such power, which I do not, the cost would destroy what remains of who you are. Then I live with it, same as before. Indeed. Elrond handed him the water. Guts took it but didn't drink. There is a council tomorrow. Representatives from many peoples gathered to discuss a matter of grave importance. Aragorn has vouched for you. I will allow you to attend to hear what must be heard. But understand, when decisions are made, your voice will not carry weight. You are not of this world. You do not understand its history, its stakes, its sorrows. Don't need to understand. Just need to know which direction to point the sword. That, Elrond said quietly, is exactly what concerns me. The door opened. An old man entered, tall and gray-bearded, leaning on a staff that hummed with barely contained force. He wore robes the color of storm clouds and a pointed hat that should have looked ridiculous, but somehow didn't. His eyes were sharp, piercing measuring guts in a single glance. So, this is our wayward warrior, the old man said. His voice rolled like distant thunder. The one who charges ringwraiths as though they were common bandits. Elrond, have you explained to him how monumentally foolish that was? I was getting to it, Gandalf. Gandalf. The name carried weight. Power. This was someone who could reshape reality if he chose to, and was choosing not to for reasons Guts didn't care to examine. You're the wizard, Guts said. I am a wizard. One of 5 sent to guide the peoples of Middle-earth through this age of shadow. And you, young man, are an anomaly. A disruption in the pattern. Tell me, do you know how you came to be here? Fell through a crack in the world. Accurate if simplistic. Gandalf approached, circling Guts like a predator assessing prey. The barriers between realms are not meant to be permeable. Yet something pulled you through, something connected to that mark you bear. Did it burn when you crossed over? Yes. And it burns now, I suspect, when shadow draws near. Because the mark is a bridge, a gateway. You are simultaneously here and not here, existing in multiple states of being at once. Fascinating, horrifying, and deeply problematic for what we face. Elrond cleared his throat. Gandalf believes, and I agree, that allowing you to join the Fellowship would be a mistake. Fellowship. The group being formed tomorrow. 9 companions tasked with a mission of utmost importance. Gandalf planted his staff, leaning on it. A mission that requires stealth secrecy and the ability to pass unnoticed through enemy lands. You, my dear boy, are about as subtle as a bonfire in a library. Every servant of the enemy for 100 miles will sense that mark and converge on your location. Guts process that. You're saying I'm a liability. I'm saying you're a beacon. A very brave, very skilled beacon who would draw every foul thing in Mordor straight to the heart of our plan. Gandalf's expression softened. It's not a judgment of your character or your abilities. It's a simple tactical reality. Then what do you want me to do? Leave? No. Elrond's voice was firm. You've seen the Nazgul. You know they exist. Sending you away blind would be both cruel and strategically unsound. We need warriors, but not all warriors serve the same purpose. Gandalf nodded. The war we fight has many fronts. The Fellowship will handle one the most crucial, but not the only. There are battles to be fought in the open, on fields where stealth matters less than strength, places where your particular talents would be invaluable. You want me to fight somewhere else? I want you to fight where you'll do the most good and the least harm. Gandalf met his eyes, and for a moment Guts saw depths there that reminded him of the God Hand. Ancient, terrible, but without the cruelty. The kingdoms of men are under assault. Rohan, Gondor. They need soldiers who won't break when darkness comes. Who faced worse and kept standing, that's you. Guts looked between them, the elf lord and the wizard both clearly expecting him to argue, to demand inclusion in their secret mission, to make it about pride or proving himself. He didn't care about any of that. Where do I go? Elrond blinked. You accept this? You're telling me there's fighting that needs doing. I can do fighting. Don't need to be part of some chosen group to swing a sword at things that need killing. Guts shrugged. Just point me at the enemy. Gandalf laughed, a genuine sound warm and surprised. By Manwë I like him. Elrond I like him. Yes, well. Elrond's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes suggested approval. Very well. You will attend the council tomorrow, hear what is at stake. Then we will discuss where best to deploy your abilities. One condition, Guts said. Oh, the hobbits. The small one, Frodo. He's carrying something. Something that drew the Nazgul. I want to know what. Elrond and Gandalf exchanged glances. Some silent communication passed between them. Finally, Elrond nodded. You'll learn at the council, along with everyone else. That night, Guts was given a room overlooking the valley, clean bed, running water, food brought by silent elven servants who left without speaking. Luxury he had no use for. He sat at the window watching stars emerge over the mountains. The brand was quiet. The dragon slayer leaned against the wall, clean and oiled. Tomorrow there would be talking, planning, the kind of political maneuvering he'd always hated. But after that, there would be fighting. And fighting, at least he understood. The council convened at dawn in a pavilion open to the sky. Representatives from across Middle-earth gathered in a circle. Elves, dwarves, men, hobbits. Guts stood at the back, arms crossed, listening. An old man in rich robes spoke of Gondor's needs. A dwarf with a magnificent beard argued about ancient debts. Elves discussed the failing strength of their kind. The talking went in circles, everyone protecting their own interests. Bent turrets while the real threat waited in the shadows. Then Frodo stood, drew something from his neck. A ring. Simple gold band that caught the light and seemed to devour it simultaneously. The temperature in the pavilion dropped. Guts felt the brand react. Not burning, resonating. as though the ring recognized something in him, and he recognized something in it. A kinship of cursed things. Gandalf explained. The ring was a weapon forged by the enemy to dominate all life. It corrupted whoever bore it, slowly turning them into slaves of its will. It had to be destroyed, cast into the fires where it was made, but those fires lay deep in Mordor, in the heart of enemy territory. The Fellowship would take it there. 9 companions against an army. Secrecy their only advantage. Guts understood immediately why he couldn't go. The ring would sense the brand, would recognize a soul already marked for sacrifice, would wrap itself around that weakness and squeeze, until there was nothing left but hunger and the willingness to do anything, to gain the power to prevent more loss. It would use Casca against him, would promise that with enough strength he could protect her, keep her safe, undo what had been done, and he would believe it. Because part of him had never stopped believing that if he just got strong enough, fast enough, brutal enough, he could cut his way to a world where people he cared about didn't break. You see it, Elrond said quietly. He'd moved to stand beside Guts without being noticed. You see what it would do to you. Yeah. The mark makes you vulnerable. Not to domination, your will is too strong for simple control, but to bargaining. To the promise of power as protection. It would hollow you out from the inside while leaving your strength intact. Make you its perfect champion. Guts watched Frodo, small and terrified, accepting the burden anyway. Volunteering for slow destruction because someone had to. He's braver than me, Guts said. No, he's simply fighting a different kind of battle. Your courage is no less for being deployed elsewhere. The Council continued. The Fellowship was chosen Frodo and 3 other hobbits. Gandalf Aragorn, an elf called Legolas, a dwarf named Gimli, and a man from Gondor. 9 against the dark. They would leave when winter broke. Guts would leave sooner. South to Rohan, where war was already brewing. Where armies gathered and battles would be fought in the open. Where his particular brand of violence could be aimed at targets that deserved it. Aragorn found him after the council dissolved. The ranger looked tired, but determined. I would have fought beside you gladly, Aragorn said. You know that. Yeah, but they're right. The mission requires... I know. Guts cut him off. Not arguing. Just tell me one thing. When it's done, when the ring's destroyed, or you're all dead trying, what happens to this place, to Bree, to the people just trying to live? If we succeed, they survive. If we fail... Aragorn's jaw tightened. Darkness will cover everything. No escape. No refuge. Just the slow grinding down of all light until nothing remains but service to the enemy. Then don't fail. I'll try not to. Aragorn extended his hand. Fight well, Guts. Die old. Guts gripped his forearm, warrior to warrior. You too. They parted. Aragorn to his fellowship, Guts, to the armory where Elrond's people were outfitting him with supplies for the road south. Food, medicine, maps that showed the way to Rohan's capital. Gandalf appeared one last time before Guts departed. A parting gift, the wizard said, pressing something into Guts's hand. A stone pale blue warm to the touch. Elf glass. It glows when shadow draws near. Won't stop the Nazgul, but it will give you warning. Why? Because I suspect we'll have need of you before this is over. And I prefer my warriors alive, rather than ambushed in the dark. Gandalf's eyes twinkled. Besides, You remind me of someone. A king who ruled long ago who also believed that standing up was enough. He was wrong, but he was also magnificent in his wrongness. I think you might be the same. I'm not a king. No. You're something rarer. Someone who fights without illusion, without hope of ultimate victory, simply because fighting is what you do. Middle-earth has forgotten that kind of courage. Perhaps you'll remind us. Guts left Rivendell as snow began to fall. The valley disappeared behind him, swallowed by white curtains. Ahead, the road stretched south toward war and winter and kingdoms that didn't know his name. The brand was quiet. The dragon slayer was heavy. The elf glass hung at his belt, dark and still. Somewhere behind him, 9 companions prepared to walk into the jaws of hell. Somewhere ahead, armies gathered for battles that would decide the fate of an age. And Guts walked between them alone, as always, carrying nothing but steel and will and the stubborn refusal to quit while he still drew breath. One more road, one more war, one more chance to stand in the darkness and spit in its face. He'd take it. Winter came to Middle-earth with teeth. Guts traveled south through country that grew bleaker with each passing league. The maps Elrond had provided showed settlements' roads, way stations. Reality showed burned villages, empty roads, and graves dug too shallow because the ground had frozen solid. The war was already here, just quieter than what waited ahead. He followed the refugee trails, not hard to spot people fleeing south, moved in predictable patterns, abandoning farms and workshops, carrying what they could on carts or backs or not at all. They left tracks in the snow. Blood sometimes where the old or sick had fallen and been left because stopping meant everyone died. 3 days out from Rivendell, he found the first group. 40 people, maybe 50. Mostly women and children, a handful of old men too stubborn to die quietly. They'd camped in the ruins of what used to be a mill, huddled around fires that gave more smoke than warmth. Sentries stood watch with farming tools turned weapons. They saw him coming and raised those tools with shaking hands. "Stay back." The speaker was a woman gray-haired, holding a pitchfork like she knew which end did the damage. "We've nothing worth stealing. Leave us be." Guts stopped at the edge of their firelight, studied the group, half-starved, terrified, desperate enough to fight but smart enough to know it wouldn't matter. "Which way are you headed?" he asked. "South, Adoris, if we can make it. King Theoden's called for people to shelter there." The woman's grip on the pitchfork didn't loosen. "What's it to you? Same direction I'm going. You move slow. Things hunt the roads at night. You won't make it alone." "And you're offering to help out of kindness?" Suspicion sharp as broken glass. "No. I'm offering because more eyes watching for trouble means I sleep better." Guts shifted the dragon slayer on his back. "Take it or don't. Makes no difference to me." The woman studied him. Looked at the sword, the armor, the way he stood like violence waiting to happen. Looked at her people shivering in the ruins and made the calculation that everyone made eventually when death had too many faces to count. "You try anything. I won't." She nodded slowly. "Fire's there. Food's scarce, but you're welcome to share what we have." Guts shook his head. "Keep your food. I've got my own." He made camp at the perimeter back against stone positioned where he could see the approaches. The refugees gave him space. Smart. Let him work. The attack came 2 hours past midnight. Guts woke before the first scream brand burning cold against his neck. He was on his feet with the dragon slayer in hand before his mind fully registered consciousness. The elf glass at his belt blazed sudden blue-white. Shapes moved in the darkness beyond the firelight, not orcs. Smaller. Faster. Things that scuttled on too many joints with skin like boiled leather and mouths that opened sideways. 6 of them, maybe 8, circling the camp with the patience of hunters who knew their prey couldn't escape. One lunged at a sentry. The old man swung his axe too slow. The creature's claws opened his throat before the blade came close. Guts moved. The dragon slayer caught the creature mid-leap on its second jump, bisected it from skull to pelvis. Black ichor sprayed. He pivoted, swung horizontal, caught 2 more that had been flanking. The blade sheared through them like they were made of wet paper. The remaining creatures chittered, reassessing. Their many eyes fixed on him, reflecting firelight in colors that hurt to look at directly. One dropped to all 4s and charged. He let it come, waited until he could smell the rot on its breath, then stepped aside and brought the sword down on its spine. It collapsed, twitching. He crushed its skull with his boot. The last 3 scattered into the darkness. Guts didn't pursue. The refugees needed a perimeter more than he needed kills. The woman with the pitchfork stood over the dead sentry face, blank with shock. What were those things? Don't know. Don't care. Guts wiped the blade clean. They'll be back before dawn. Everyone inside the ruins. No fires after I say. No noise. You can't order. You want to argue or you want to live. He met her eyes. Choose fast. She chose. They huddled in the mill's interior, cold and terrified, while Guts stood watch in the doorway. The creatures returned an hour later. More of them this time, maybe 20. They circled the ruins, clicking and hissing, but didn't attack. Testing. Learning. At dawn, they retreated. Guts counted the group 3 dead, including the sentry. Could have been worse. Usually was. We bury them, someone asked. No time. Ground's too hard anyway. Guts shouldered his pack. We move now, before they gather more. The woman, her name was Mara. He learned to organize the departure with surprising efficiency. Within an hour, they were on the road moving south in a column that stretched too long and moved too slow. Guts ranged ahead, checking the road for ambush points, counting tracks in the snow. Orc prints shallow and wide. Wolf prints too large. And others he didn't recognize, belonging to things that walked on feet never meant for walking. They made 8 miles that day. Half what Guts could have done alone. But alone meant nothing when the whole point was keeping these people breathing. The pattern repeated. March during daylight, camp at dusk, fight at night. Every evening brought something new: orcs probing defenses, wargs testing for weakness. Once a pack of creatures that looked like men with their faces turned inside out. Guts killed them all with mechanical efficiency, no wasted motion, no unnecessary risks. The refugees stopped being afraid of him around the 4th night, started being grateful instead. Worse somehow. Gratitude carried expectations. Why are you doing this? Mara asked. They sat by a fire risk, calculated cold more dangerous than light, while the others slept. You could move faster without us, reach wherever you're going before winter gets its teeth in deep. Yeah. So why slow yourself down for strangers? Guts considered the question. Thought about Rivendell, about Gandalf, saying there were battles that mattered beyond the ones you chose. Thought about Casca, about every time he'd failed to protect someone who needed protecting. Got nothing better to do, he said finally. Mara snorted. Liar. But I'll accept it. She poked the fire with a stick. My husband died 3 weeks back. Orcs burned our farm. I grabbed what I could and ran. Kept running. Didn't think I'd make it this far. You're tougher than you think. Maybe. Or maybe I just haven't run out of road yet. She looked at him. You've seen worse than this. I can tell. The way you fight. Like you've been doing it so long, you've forgotten how to do anything else. Close enough. They sat in silence after that. The fire crackled. In the distance, something howled. Guts checked the elf glass, still dark. Whatever made that sound wasn't close enough to matter yet. 10 days out from Rivendell, they reached a crossroads. The main road continued south toward Rohan. A smaller path branched east, barely visible under snow, leading into hills where smoke rose thin and gray. Mara pointed. That's Dunharrow. Small settlement. My sister lives there. Lived, maybe. I don't know. How far? Half a day's walk, maybe less. She looked at the refugees, then at Guts. They need supplies. Food, blankets, anything. The main road has nothing. Everything's been picked clean by people who came before us. Guts studied the eastern path. Narrow, easy to ambush. But smoke meant people, and people meant resources. We detour, he said, but we move fast, moves in and out before dark. The path climbed into foothills that should have been beautiful under different circumstances. Pine forests, clearings where deer would graze in peacetime streams frozen into sculptures of white ice. Now it was just terrain that could hide threats. They found Dunharrow in early afternoon, or what was left of it. The village had been sacked. Recently, smoke still rose from collapsed roofs. Bodies lay in the street, frozen in the positions they'd died. 20 people, maybe 30. Hard to count when pieces didn't always add up to wholes. Mara made a sound like she'd been gut-punched. Started forward. Guts caught her arm. Wait. My sister is dead or gone. Either way, walking in blind gets you killed. He scanned the ruins. No movement, no sound beyond wind through broken walls. Stay here with the others. I'll check it. He moved through Dunharrow street by street, the Dragon Slayer, ready every sense tuned for ambush. The attack had been thorough. Systematic, not a raid, an execution. The orcs who'd done this had taken their time. He found survivors in the town hall basement. 8 of them huddled in darkness, too terrified to make sound. An old man. 3 women. 4 children. They stared at him with eyes that had seen too much and stopped processing anything except the next breath. You're safe, Guts said. Knew it was a lie. Said it anyway because someone had to. Come on, there's a group outside. We're heading south. The old man shook his head. They'll come back. The orcs, they always come back. Then we'll be gone when they do. He led them out. Mara found her sister among the refugees, alive, broken, but breathing. They held each other and wept, while Guts organized salvage. Food from cellars, blankets from houses, medicine if any remained untainted. The group was nearly done when the brand flared. Guts turned. The elf glass erupted in blue flame. From the north end of town, a sound like metal dragging over stone. He ran. The orc war party hit the edge of town at full charge. 30 strong armored carrying weapons that had tasted blood recently enough to still be wet. They saw the refugees and howled with anticipation. Guts hit them first. The Dragon Slayer took the lead orc's head off before the creature realized he was there. He flowed into the mass of them, blade moving in arcs that sheared through armor and bone. No technique, no style. Just overwhelming brutality applied with surgical precision. An orc came at him from the left. He caught its sword on the Dragon Slayer's crossguard kneaded in the chest, brought the blade down through its collar. Another swung a mace at his head. He ducked Rose inside its guard, drove his shoulder into its sternum. Ribs cracked. He finished it with an upward thrust that split its jaw. They surrounded him. Smart tactics. Wrong enemy. Guts spun the Dragon Slayer horizontal and cleared a circle 6 feet wide. Black blood painted the snow. Orc bodies fell in pieces. The survivors broke formation, scrambling back suddenly, realizing they'd cornered something that didn't know how to be cornered. He pursued, not giving them time to regroup. Caught the slowest one in 5 strides, cleaved it from shoulder to hip. The next tried to block. The Dragon Slayer shattered its weapon and continued through its torso. The last 3 ran. He let them. Sending a message was worth more than 3 corpses. When he returned to the town center, the refugees were staring. Not with fear now. Something else. Awe, horror. The kind of respect you gave natural disasters. Mara approached slowly. You killed 30 orcs, alone. 27. 3 got away. That's... She stopped. Started again. Thank you. Guts shook his head, wiped the blade clean. We're leaving. Now. Before more come. They marched through the afternoon, pushing hard, covering ground, until the refugees were ready to collapse. Guts called halt only when full dark made travel more dangerous than rest. They made camp in a ravine sheltered from wind, defensible. That night no attacks came. The brand stayed quiet. The elf glass remained dark. Guts stood watch anyway because quiet meant nothing when the world wanted you dead. Mara found him at dawn. We'll reach the main road again today. From there, 3 days to Adoris, if the weather holds. Yeah. What about you? You heading to Adoris too, eventually. Got business there. Guts looked south where mountains cut the horizon. War's coming. King needs soldiers who won't break when darkness shows its real face. You're volunteering? I'm going where the fighting is. Same thing. She was quiet for a moment. Then, you saved us, all of us. We'd have died a dozen times over without you. You'd have figured it out. No, we wouldn't have. She held his gaze. I don't know what you're running from. Don't need to know. But whatever it is, you should know you're more than just the sword. More than just the killing. You're someone who stopped when he didn't have to. Someone who chose to walk slower so others could keep up. Guts didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know if there was anything to say. He'd spent so long being a weapon that being anything else felt like wearing someone else's skin. Get your people ready, he said finally. Long walk ahead. They reached the main road by midday. The refugees continued south, moving faster now, hope giving them strength. Guts walked with them another 2 days until Adoris appeared on the horizon, a city carved into the mountainside banners, flying gold and green. At the city gates, Mara stopped. Will we see you again? Maybe. If you're still alive when the fighting's done. Same to you. She smiled. It didn't quite reach her eyes, but it was real. Die, old Guts. You too. He watched them enter the city, refugees swallowed by walls and guards and the temporary safety of stone. Then he turned south again toward the borderlands where Rohan met its enemies toward the war that was already burning. The Dragon Slayer was heavy on his back. The brand was quiet. The elf glass hung dark at his belt. But something had changed in the 2 weeks since Rivendell. Something small. A shift in weight, maybe. A redistribution of purpose. He'd fought to survive. Fought to protect people who mattered. Fought because fighting was the only language he spoke fluently. Now he was fighting for strangers, for people whose names he'd never learn, for a world that wasn't his but was becoming familiar in the way scars became familiar, not wanted, but carried anyway. The road stretched empty before him. Behind smoke rose from Adoris's forges. War preparations. The kingdom girding itself for battles that would determine whether light endured or shadow swallowed everything. Guts walked into that future, the same way he'd walked into every other one, step at a time, blade ready, expecting nothing but prepared for everything. The long defeat continued. He continued with it. One more mile, one more fight, one more dawn that he didn't deserve but took anyway. Same as always. The fortress called Helms Deep sat in the mountains like a fist of stone waiting to punch back. Guts arrived 3 days before the army did, following rumors and refugees and the smell of preparation that always preceded large-scale violence. The fortress was old, built by hands that understood siege warfare before men had proper words for it. Thick walls, deep trenches, a single gate designed to funnel attackers into a kill zone. Good defensible position. Still wouldn't be enough. Theoden's forces were already there, soldiers, civilians, anyone who could hold a weapon or tend the wounded. Guts watched them from the causeway, counting numbers, assessing morale. Maybe 300 fighters, twice that many civilians sheltering in the caves behind the keep. Against what was coming, it would be like trying to hold back the ocean with your hands. A rider approached. Not a soldier, wrong posture, wrong equipment. Rohan colors, but wearing them like borrowed clothes. The man dismounted, and Guts recognized the weathered face, the hard eyes. Aragorn. Guts. The ranger looked him over, noting the wear on his armor, the new scars, the way he stood like he'd been fighting continuously since they'd parted. You made it to Rohan. Yeah. You made it through Moria. A shadow crossed Aragorn's face. Not all of us did. Guts understood. Loss had a weight you could see if you knew where to look. He didn't ask for details. Men who'd earned the right to grieve didn't need to explain their dead to strangers. Gandalf, he asked instead. Gone. Fell fighting a creature of shadow and flame. But not dead, I think. It's complicated. Aragorn gestured toward the deep. The wizard who fell was gray. The one who returned was white. Same man, different power. He's rallying Rohan's scattered forces. We expect him back before the assault begins. 2 other figures approached. An elf, tall and fair-haired, moving with the liquid grace of someone who'd spent centuries learning to walk. A dwarf, broad and bearded, carrying an axe that looked like it could split boulders. They stopped when they saw Guts' hands moving to weapons by reflex. Peace, Aragorn said. This is Guts. He fought beside us at Weathertop. Legolas Gimli, the warrior I mentioned. Legolas studied Guts, with eyes older than his face suggested. The one who charged the Nazgul. I had thought Aragorn was exaggerating. He wasn't, Gimli said. Look at the sword. That's not a weapon for timid men. It's a weapon for killing, Guts said. Same as yours. Gimli laughed, a sound like rocks tumbling. Aye, direct. I can respect that. They briefed him on the situation. An army of Uruk-hai orcs, bred for war, stronger and smarter than the usual fodder, was marching on the deep. 10,000 strong, maybe more. They'd been created by Saruman, a wizard who'd betrayed his order and allied with darkness. The fortress had to hold until reinforcements arrived. If it fell, Rohan fell. If Rohan fell, the West fell. Simple math. Terrible odds. What do you need me to do? Guts asked. Aragorn pointed to the wall. The gate is our weakest point. Thick but not impenetrable. If they bring siege equipment, if they breach it, everything behind becomes indefensible. We'll have soldiers on the wall, archers providing cover. But if they break through, someone needs to plug that gap long enough for us to regroup. You want me to hold a breach? I want you to stand in a hole in our defenses and make them regret trying to exploit it. Aragorn met his eyes. It's a death sentence. But you're the only one I've seen who might survive it. Guts looked at the gate, studied the angles, the approaches, the way attackers would funnel through. Narrow space, lots of bodies compressed into a small area. Perfect for a blade that didn't care about precision, only about clearing space through sheer momentum. I'll do it. You don't want time to think? No. Point me at the door. When it breaks, I'll be there. Gimli grunted approval. No hesitation. Dwarf-like. I'm starting to like you human. They spent the remaining time preparing. Guts sharpened the dragon slayer until its edge could split hairs, oiled the berserker armor's joints, checked his cannon arm's mechanisms. The elf glass he gave to Aragorn. If it glows shadows close, might give you warning. You won't need it. I'll know when they're close. Guts tapped the brand. This tells me everything I need. The night before the battle, he found a quiet corner of the fortress and sat alone. Not sleeping, not resting. Just existing in the space between violence, where thoughts could surface if you let them. Casca. The eclipse. Griffith's ascension. Every friend torn apart. While he'd been too weak, too slow, too human to stop it. He'd been running from that failure for so long. It had become the rhythm of his breathing. But here in this fortress, about to be drowned in enemies, he wasn't running. He was choosing to stand. Not because he thought he'd survive. Not because he expected victory. Just because standing was the only response he'd ever learned that felt honest. The elf Legolas found him there. Sat nearby without speaking, arrows laid out for fletching inspection. After a while, Aragorn says you're not from Middle-earth. He's right. Where then? Somewhere worse. Legolas considered that. I have lived 3,000 years. I have seen the great works crumble and the mighty brought low. I have watched friends age and die while I remained. What could be worse than that? Guts looked at him. At the ageless face, the eyes that had witnessed empires. Having everyone you care about torn apart in front of you, being forced to watch. Being marked so that darkness always knows where to find you. And then living anyway, because dying would be giving them what they want. Legolas was quiet for a long time. I think, he said finally, that perhaps we understand each other. Maybe. The elf stood, gathering his arrows. Fight well tomorrow, Guts of Nowhere. I will cover your position from the wall. Don't waste arrows on me. Aim for the ones I miss. A slight smile. There is no one you will miss. But I will aim true regardless. The army arrived at dusk. They heard it before they saw it, 10,000 feet marching in unison, drums beating, voices raised in war cries that carried over the mountains. Then they crested the ridge, and the sheer mass of them blotted out the horizon. Uruk-hai, taller than men, broader, wrapped in black armor that drank the torchlight. They carried pike swords, siege ladders, and something else. A massive ram tree trunk, thick, mounted with a carved head shaped like a wolf's snarl. Theoden stood on the wall, face grim. So it begins. The assault started with arrows. The sky went dark with them, thousands launched in waves designed to strip defenders from the battlements. Rohan's archers returned fire. Bodies fell on both sides. The mathematics of attrition played out in screaming and blood. Then the ladders came, Uruk-hai swarming up like ants, dozens at a time, hitting the walls in waves. Defenders met them at the top, swords clashing, men shouting the tight, brutal fighting, where mistakes meant death and luck meant living another 30 seconds. Guts stood at the gate watching, waiting. The dragon slayer rested against his shoulder. Around him, soldiers gripped weapons and prayed to gods he didn't know. The ram hit the gate like thunder, once, twice. The wood groaned, but held. Iron reinforcements sang with the impact. Aragorn was shouting orders, directing defenders to shore up the gate from inside with whatever they could find. Timber beams, stones, bodies, if necessary. The third impact cracked the wood. Guts felt it more than heard it, the moment when structural integrity gave way, when defense became desperation. He moved forward, pushing through soldiers who scattered to give him space. "Not yet," Aragorn called from above. "Wait until they're committed." The fourth impact, the fifth. Splinters flew, iron bent. The gate bulged inward, and through the widening gap Guts could see them. Uruk-hai packed shoulder to shoulder, weapons ready, eyes burning with the hunger for slaughter. The sixth impact shattered the gate. Wood exploded inward. The ram punched through, dragging its operators with it. Behind them, the Uruk-hai charged, roaring a tide of armor and muscle and killing intent compressed into the narrow bottleneck of the gateway. Guts stepped into the breach. The dragon slayer came up in a horizontal arc that took the first 3 Uruk-hai across their chests. The blade sheared through armor, ribs, spines, exiting through their backs in a spray of black blood. He reversed the swing, brought it down vertically on the next wave. Skulls split, bodies crumpled. The Uruk-hai hit him like a battering ram. He planted his feet and became the wall. The dragon slayer moved in patterns learned from 1,000 battles. Sweep low, crush, the legs reverse high. Split the skulls, thrust forward, clear the center. No wasted motion. Every strike calculated to create maximum damage in minimum time. They tried to flank. He pivoted, sword whistling through air, thick with blood, caught them mid-step. Bodies piled at his feet. He kicked them aside, maintaining space, refusing to let them use their numbers to compress him against the rubble. An Uruk-hai captain pushed through the press, larger than the rest, wielding a blade nearly as long as the dragon slayer. It swung for his head. Guts blocked, felt the impact sing up his arms, drove his boot into its knee. Bones snapped. The captain stumbled. He took its head with an upward slash that continued through 2 more Uruk-hai behind it. Above, Legolas's arrows fell like silver rain, each one finding an eye, a throat, a gap in armor. Gimli roared from somewhere on the wall, his axe rising and falling in rhythm with dwarven war cries. Aragorn fought beside common soldiers, his sword a blur of steel that seemed to be everywhere at once. But the breach was Guts's. His alone. The Uruk-hai kept coming. He kept killing them. Time lost meaning. There was only the next swing, the next target, the next heartbeat stolen from death's schedule. His muscles screamed. His lungs burned. Wounds accumulated, cuts on his arms, a gash across his ribs, something that might have been a broken finger. He ignored them. Pain was just information. It told you that you were still alive, still capable of standing, still capable of making the other bastard fall first. The press intensified. Too many bodies, not enough space. An Uruk-hai got inside his guard, drove a knife toward his throat. Guts caught the blade on his armored forearm. Head-butted, the creature felt its nose break, threw it backward into its companions. But more came, always more. His vision started to gray at the edges. Blood loss, exhaustion. the inevitable toll of being human trying to do the work of 10 men. He could feel his body beginning to fail. Muscles going sluggish, reflexes slowing by fractions that would soon become fatal. The berserker armor whispered, not with words, with promise. He could feel it there, wrapped around him, waiting, offering what it always offered: the strength to continue past the point where flesh and will should break, the ability to keep fighting even as bones fractured and organs ruptured. The transformation from man into weapon, pure and absolute. All it would cost was everything. Guts had used the armor before, knew its price, knew what he'd be when it finally released him, if it released him. Broken, bleeding internally, days or weeks shaved off, a life already lived on borrowed time. But the breach was widening. The Uruk-hai were gaining ground. Behind him, civilians huddled in the caves. Women, children, people who'd fled their homes hoping for safety, who'd placed their faith in stone walls and soldiers' courage. People who would die if he failed here. He activated the armor. Reality shifted. Pain vanished. Exhaustion evaporated. His body moved like it was no longer bound by the rules that governed ordinary flesh. The Dragon Slayer became weightless, an extension of will rather than steel. Guts exploded forward into the mass of Uruk-hai. The blade moved too fast to follow. It carved through armor like silk through bone, like water through entire ranks of enemies, as though they were made of morning fog. He became the storm, the unstoppable force, the thing that didn't know how to die, because death required stopping, and stopping wasn't part of the equation anymore. Uruk-hai died by the dozen, by the score. The breach became a grinder, and he was the teeth. Black blood painted the stones, the walls, the night itself. Bodies piled so high they created their own barricade, forcing the attackers to climb over their dead just to reach him. He let them come, killed them at the peak, threw corpses back to trip the next wave. Somewhere in the distance, horns sounded. Gandalf had returned white-robed and radiant, leading Rohan's reinforcements down from the heights. The Uruk-hai wavered, caught between the breach that wouldn't break and an army at their backs. They broke. Not all at once, but in ripples. Warriors turning to flee, officers trying to rally them, the entire assault collapsing under its own weight and the realization that victory wasn't coming. Guts stood in the breach blade, still raised, watching them retreat. The berserker armor's grip began to loosen. Pain returned like a knife to the gut. His legs buckled. He caught himself on the Dragon Slayer, used it as a crutch, forced himself to remain upright. Soldiers poured past him, pursuing the fleeing Uruk-hai. Someone, Aragorn, maybe, shouted his name. He didn't respond. Couldn't. His entire focus was on breathing, on staying conscious, on not collapsing in the rubble and blood. The armor released fully. Agony flooded every nerve. Ribs definitely broken. Internal bleeding almost certainly. His right hand wouldn't close properly, something torn or snapped in the tendons. Blood ran from wounds he couldn't remember receiving, painting his armor in layers of red over black. But he was standing. The breach was held. The fortress hadn't fallen. Gimli appeared at his side, face spattered with Uruk blood. By Durin's beard, I've never seen anything like that. How many did you kill? Guts tried to answer, coughed blood instead. Get a healer. Aragorn's voice sharp with command. Hands caught Guts as his legs finally gave out. They lowered him against rubble that was still warm from impact. Stay with us. You held the line. The battle's won. Good. Guts managed. His voice sounded distant, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. That's good. Legolas crouched beside him, something like awe in his ancient eyes. You stood alone against hundreds. Thousands, perhaps. No one should be able to do that. Wasn't alone, Guts said. Blood filled his mouth. He spat it aside. You covered me. Dwarf held the wall. Ranger kept them organized. Still, Legolas shook his head. The songs will remember this. The man who became the gate, who made his body the wall between darkness and dawn. Guts wanted to argue. Wanted to say songs didn't matter, that he'd just done what needed doing, that any of them would have stood there if they'd had to. But consciousness was slipping darkness, creeping in from the edges. The last thing he heard was Aragorn's voice. Get him to the caves. Find the best healers we have. He lives, or I'll drag him back from death myself. Then nothing. Just the dark and the distant sound of his own heartbeat, stubborn and relentless. He woke 3 days later in a cave that smelled of herbs and clean bandages. His body felt like it had been rebuilt from broken pieces that didn't quite fit together anymore. Every breath was labor. Every movement was negotiation with pain. But he was alive. Aragorn sat nearby, cleaning his sword. When he saw Guts' eyes open, he set the blade aside. Welcome back. We thought we'd lost you. Hard to kill. Clearly. Aragorn poured water, helped him drink. The healers say you'll recover. Slowly. You did damage that should have been permanent, but somehow you're knitting back together. They're calling it a miracle. Not a miracle. Just stubborn. That's one word for it. Aragorn was quiet for a moment. You saved the deep. Theoden wants to honor you, give you land's title a place in Rohan's history. Guts shook his head, regretted it immediately as pain flared. Don't want lands. Don't want titles. What do you want? To heal, then to fight. War's not over. No, it's not. Aragorn stood moved to the cave entrance where sunlight struggled through. Gandalf says there's a greater battle coming. At Minas Tirith, Gondor's capital. That's where the enemy will make his final push. We'll need every sword we can muster. Then point me at it, when you can stand without bleeding. Aragorn looked back, something like respect in his eyes. Rest, Guts. You've earned it. When the call comes, I know you'll answer. He left. Guts lay in the darkness, listening to his body slowly remember how to be human rather than weapon. Outside, the fortress was being rebuilt. The dead were being buried. Life continued in the way it always did. After violence, people finding reasons to keep going. Keep breathing. Keep hoping that tomorrow might be gentler than today. Guts closed his eyes. Somewhere in the wreckage of his thoughts, he found something unexpected. Pride. Not in the killing, not in the survival, but in the choice. He'd stood in that breach not because he had to, not because fate demanded it, but because he'd decided it mattered. Because protecting strangers in a world not his own felt like it meant something. The long defeat continued. But he was still standing, same as always. One more battle survived, one more dawn stolen from darkness, one more chance to choose standing over falling. He'd take it. Healing took longer than fighting, always did. Guts spent 2 weeks in Rohan's halls while his body knitted itself back together through sheer, stubborn refusal to stay broken. The healers muttered about miracles and impossible recoveries. He ignored them. Bones set, tissue mended, scars formed over wounds that should have killed him. Same pattern as always. When he could walk without coughing blood, he started moving south. Aragorn had already departed with the main force racing to reach Gondor before the enemy's full strength descended. Guts traveled alone, following refugee trails and abandoned roads through country that grew bleaker the closer he came to the war's true heart. The brand was restless, not burning but humming with constant low-grade tension, warning him, telling him that the shadows here were different from Rohan's, older, hungrier, more aware. 3 days from Adoris, he found the refugees, maybe 60 people strung out along a river crossing where the bridge had been destroyed. They'd camped on the near bank, surrounded by what little they'd managed to carry from homes that no longer existed. Children huddled against their mothers. Old men stared at nothing. The familiar geography of displacement. Guts approached slowly, making noise so they'd hear him coming. A young man with a hunting bow stepped forward, arrow nocked but not drawn. "That's close enough, stranger." Guts stopped. "You heading to Minas Tirith? If we can get across. River's too deep to ford, and the orcs burned the bridge 3 days back." The young man's grip on his bow tightened. "You alone?" "Yeah. Armed like you're expecting war." "War's already here. Just hasn't caught you yet." Guts studied the river. Fast current chunks of bridge timber floating past, dangerous crossing even without equipment. With children and elderly nearly impossible. "How many can swim?" "Maybe 20. The rest?" The young man shook his head. "We've been trying to build a raft. Not going well." Guts moved to the riverbank. The bridge's stone foundations still stood jutting from the water like broken teeth. Timber wreckage was scattered along both banks. Not enough to rebuild, but maybe enough to improvise. "I'll help." The young man blinked. "Why?" "Because you need it." Guts started gathering timber. "Get your people ready. We cross before nightfall." They worked through the afternoon. The refugees had rope-salvaged nails, hands willing to work. Guts provided direction and muscle-hauling beams into position, lashing supports, creating something that was less bridge and more controlled collapse across the water. An older woman approached while he worked. Gray-haired, weathered, carrying herself with the dignity of someone who'd seen enough life to stop pretending anything was permanent. "You're not from Gondor," she said. "No." "Rohan, then?" "Not there either." She studied him with eyes that missed nothing. "But you fought at the deep. I can tell. The way you move. Like you're still bracing for impact." Guts hammered a support into place. Didn't answer. "My son died there," she continued. "On the wall. Arrow through the throat. Quick, they said. Better than some got. I'm sorry. Don't be. He died defending something that mattered. That's more than most get." She touched his shoulder briefly. "Thank you. For whatever you did there. For standing when you could have run." She walked away before he could respond. Guts watched her go, then returned to the bridge. Words were harder than combat. Always had been. The crossing took until dusk. They used the improvised bridge for those who couldn't swim rope lines, for those who could but needed guidance. Guts went last, ensuring everyone made it ready to dive in if someone lost their grip. No one did. By the time full dark arrived, all 60 refugees stood on the south bank, cold and wet, but alive. The young man with the bow approached. "Minas Tirith is 3 days south. We'll make it now. Because of you. Keep moving. Don't stop after dark. Things hunt these roads. Will you come with us?" Guts looked south where darkness pressed thick against the horizon. I'm heading the same direction, but I move faster alone. At least take food. We've little enough, but keep it. You'll need it more than me. He left them there, moving into the gathering night while they made camp. Better this way. Safer for them if the brand's beacon didn't linger in one place too long. The road south wound through hills that had been farmland once, now just ash and burned stumps. The enemy's forces had swept through here weeks ago, practicing for larger conquests. Bodies lay in the ditches too numerous to bury. Guts passed them without stopping. The dead didn't need his help. The brand flared. He stopped. Drew the dragon slayer, scanned the darkness. Nothing visible but the elf glass at his belt had begun to glow faint blue. Not the blazing alarm of Weathertop, just a whisper, a suggestion that Shadow was paying attention. Movement in the sky. Guts looked up, saw it circling against the stars, winged massive, its outline wrong in ways that made his eyes ache. Fell beast, which meant Nazgul. The creature banked descended. Its rider was a void, wrapped in black fabric, crowned with tarnished metal, radiating the same crushing dread he remembered from Weathertop. But only one. Not the full 9. Scout, maybe. Or hunter sent to find something specific. The Nazgul's mount landed 50 feet away, talons scarring the earth. The wraith dismounted with movements that suggested joints bending in directions they shouldn't. It raised one hand, and when it spoke, the words bypassed his ears and carved themselves directly into thought. Marked 1. We meet again. Guts shifted his stance, blade ready. You should have stayed gone. You wounded us at Weathertop, made us hesitate. Our master was displeased. The Nazgul moved closer, each step accompanied by a temperature drop. But we learned. You carry a beacon. You draw shadow to you like moths to flame, useful when one wishes to find you. What do you want to understand? The wraith tilted its head, studying him. You do not belong here. Your essence is foreign, torn from another place. Yet you stand with our enemies. Why? None of your business. Perhaps. Or perhaps you could be persuaded. The mark you bear speaks of sacrifice, of loss, of those taken from you. The Nazgul's voice dropped, became almost gentle, almost human. We too were men once. We too lost things we cherished, until we were offered power, immortality, freedom from the weakness that let others be torn away. The brand burned. Guts felt it reaching, felt the Nazgul's words, trying to wrap around the scar tissue and squeeze, offering temptation in exactly the shape of his specific damage. You could have such power, the wraith continued. The Dark Lord values strength. He could remove that mark, replace it with something greater. You would never lose anyone again. Never be too weak to protect what matters. For a moment, just a moment, Guts felt the pull. The promise that if he was just strong enough, brutal enough, willing to pay any price, he could create a world where Casca stayed whole, where the eclipse never happened, where everyone he'd failed to save walked away breathing. Then he remembered Griffith making similar promises, remembered the cost of power bought rather than earned, remembered that every time someone offered strength without struggle, the price was written in other people's blood. No. The Nazgul was silent. Then, you refuse. I've heard this speech before. Different words. Same poison. Guts raised the Dragon Slayer. You offering power, or you planning to fight? We do not offer twice. The wraith drew its blade. Then you die here, alone, unmourned, having accomplished nothing but delaying the inevitable. Story of my life. The Nazgul attacked. It moved faster than at Weathertop, learned, adapted. The blade came at him from angles that defied geometry, striking from positions that shouldn't connect. Guts blocked, felt the impact jar his bones riposted with a slash that would have split a normal opponent. The Dragon Slayer passed through darkness. The Nazgul's form rippled, reformed, continued its assault without pause. He'd known this would happen. Remembered Gandalf's warning you couldn't kill them with ordinary means. The blade could disrupt, could hurt, could buy time, but not destroy. The wraith pressed forward. Its sword moved in patterns that seemed to bend light to carve space itself. Guts gave ground, blocking, deflecting, searching for openings that didn't exist in conventional terms. A strike got through. Caught his shoulder, tore armor, bit into flesh. Cold spread from the wound like poison. His arm went numb. He switched his grip, one-handed now. Swung upward, caught the Nazgul across its torso. The wraith staggered, actually staggered darkness, unraveling for a heartbeat before reconstituting. You cannot win, it said. You can only delay your ending. Good enough. They fought in the ruined farmland, blade against blade, will against dread. Guts felt the cold creeping deeper, felt his strength ebbing under the wraith's assault. Every parry came slower, every riposte missed by wider margins. The Nazgul sensed victory, pressed harder. Its strikes became more aggressive, less cautious. It abandoned defense, overwhelming him with speed and the certainty of its immortality. Guts waited for that overconfidence, let the wraith commit fully to an attack, then dropped low, swept the Dragon Slayer in a horizontal arc, aimed not at the Nazgul, but at its mount. The fell beast shrieked. The blade carved through its wing joint, severing muscle and membrane. It collapsed, thrashing, unable to lift itself. The Nazgul turned toward its mount. Just for a second. Just enough. Guts charged. Put everything into one strike, aiming for the wraith's core. The Dragon Slayer connected, and for an instant, impossibly, he felt resistance. Felt something solid beneath the darkness. Felt the blade bite into whatever ancient remnant of flesh still anchored the spirit to physical reality. The Nazgul screamed. Actually screamed high and piercing and full of rage, older than kingdoms. It dissolved, not destroyed, just forced apart, dispersed into shadow that fled like smoke before wind. The fell beast tried to follow, dragging itself across the ground with its remaining wing. Guts put it down with a thrust through its skull. Silence returned, just whined through burned fields and the sound of his own ragged breathing. Guts examined his shoulder. The wound was shallow, but wrong. The flesh around it had turned gray, numb like frostbite reaching inward. He'd need proper healing. Soon. But not here. He started walking, south toward Gondor, toward the war, toward whatever waited in Minas Tirith's shadow. The encounter had taught him something important. The Nazgul could be disrupted, could be hurt, could be driven back. Not killed, not without the right weapons, the right circumstances, but wounded, made to hesitate. In a war where every second mattered, hesitation was as good as victory. 3 days later, he crested a rise and saw it. Minas Tirith. The White City. 7 tiers of stone climbing a mountain's flank, crowned with towers that caught sunlight and threw it back like defiance, made architecture. Banners flew from every level, the white tree of Gondor, ancient symbol of a kingdom that had stood for 3,000 years and refused to fall. But surrounding the city, spreading across the plain like a disease, was the enemy's army. Tens of thousands, maybe more. Orcs, trolls, siege engines, battering rams, and things Guts had no names for. They covered the ground so completely that earth disappeared beneath armor and flesh and the machinery of conquest. And above them, circling, were shapes that blotted out the stars. The Nazgul, all 9 of them. Guts stood on the ridgeline dragon slayer, across his back shoulder, throbbing with cold that wouldn't fade. Below, the greatest battle of the age was about to begin. Below, men would stand or fall. Below, the choice between light and absolute darkness would be decided. He started down the slope. Toward the army. Toward the Nazgul. Toward whatever waited in that sea of enemies. Not because he thought he'd survive. Not because he expected victory. Not because songs would remember his name. Just because standing up was the only response he'd ever learned that felt honest. The long defeat continued. He continued with it. One more battle. One more impossible stand. One more chance to spit in fate's face and make it work for the privilege of killing him. Ahead, Minas Tirith's gates stood open. Defenders lined the walls. Aragorn was down there somewhere, preparing for the storm. Gandalf, Legolas, and Gimli, soldiers whose names he'd never learn, but whose courage he'd witnessed. Guts walked toward them through the gathering dark. The dragon slayer was heavy. The brand was burning. The war was waiting. He'd take it, same as always. Guts' arrival in Middle-earth was not merely a tactical anomaly. It became a psychological and existential catalyst for everything that followed. In a world built upon willed choice and hope. Guts, with his merciless combat instinct and a survival drive forged through endless suffering, introduced Middle-earth to a harsher, more grounded vision of individual strength. He did not come to shape the destiny of others, yet the raw persistence with which he endured forced those around him to reconsider the weight of their own choices between light and darkness. In great battles such as Helms Deep and the Pelennor Fields, Guts was never a chosen hero in the traditional sense. He did not fulfill prophecy, nor did he claim glory. Instead, he arrived where the fighting was thickest, buying precious moments with blood and steel moments the collective force of armies could then turn into victory. His sheer resilience earned the respect of the Rohirrim, while even Gandalf came to regard unwavering will as a power that could stand alongside magic itself. The legacy Guts left behind was not preserved in songs or banners, but in the memories of those who survived. They remembered a warrior who stood where chaos was most absolute, who faced the darkness not for fame or reward, but out of a refusal to let others endure the pain he had already lived through. That legacy proved more enduring than brute strength alone, a testament that human will, when pushed to its limit, can defy even fate itself. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And be sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss our future videos. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.